as it goes over a bump or round a corner or over a curve. Now in this particular case there isn't really a distortion of the shape with that white stripe, but it still helps describe the curved surface because the right hand edge of that white patch is a different shape to the left hand edge of that white patch. Just added a few cast shadows and now blocking in the dress that the woman sat on the pebbles is wearing. And then a little touch of yellow for that bag or cooler or whatever it is at her back. And that links up quite nicely with the yellow parasol, but I don't want to have too much yellow all in one spot, but just those two items is absolutely fine. And in general, it's a good idea to have a bit of yellow on the left, a bit of yellow on the right, perhaps a bit of pink up in the cliffs, a bit of pink down in the foreground, just to get the eye to bounce around a bit. Blocking in the figures near the waterline now. And now adding some more shadow colors underneath the parasols. So, you know, obviously on a sunny day, the whole point of these parasols is to provide shade. So it's important to incorporate the effect that they would have within our painting. So a lot of these figures are going to be a near silhouette, not because they're backlit or anything, but just simply because they are in shadow. But this figure here, just standing on the beach looking out towards the water, if there's sort of one focal point of the entire painting, I would say that it's this person. And for that reason, that's why I've blocked in the shirt as white. So I want a reasonable amount of contrast on this figure. We'll go with a darker color for the shorts though, but we'll get to that in a moment. So some indication of an arm, and then just blocked in the whole lower half of the figure in my kind of in the flesh tone that I'm using today, but then back in with a dark blue for the shorts. A little bit of a highlight on the hat. So in general, I haven't concerned myself too much in this painting with, for the figures, with highlights, midtones and shadow within one figure. But just a little touch of a highlight there, it all helps. And in a bit, I'll add a little cast shadow for that main figure as well, just to make it look a little more realistic. So sorry about my hand covering those two figures at the waterline, but you can see I've just added some yellow to the hair there So again, I've got that left to right, little patch of yellow on the left, little patch of yellow on the right. So at the moment, to sort of summarize what we've got a very simple treatment of the sky. We've got the distant cliffs and tree line, which I've painted quite loosely. And then we had this massive expanse of Pebble Beach, onto which I've put some cast shadows in the foreground to create a sense of undulation. And then I've added some people from the middle ground to off in the distance. And I've painted a half dozen of those fairly carefully outlined and or silhouetted. The rest are just little marks, but being quite careful about the size of those marks and the direction of those marks as we go off into the distance. Now, having done that, what I'm doing now is adding a little bit of texture and starting to paint just a few pebbles in the foreground. But I'm not going to be too fussy about this. I mean, I've seen quite a bit of art actually where people focus on, so for example, just to the left of the bulldog clip on my pad of paper, if you imagine picking half a dozen pebbles there, you could make a really carefully considered painting out of just those half a dozen pebbles, because there's really interesting colors going on, interesting shadows and interesting textures. So just doing a close-up still life of the pebbles alone, I would say, is a worthwhile artistic subject. But for my painting, that's not what I want to do, because if I paint a pebble in detail in the foreground, it's just going to pull the eye into that pebble, and it's going to lose the main focus of the painting, which is really off in the distance. So convention is perhaps to have the most detail in the foreground of a painting and then less in the background. But here I'm trying to do the reverse for the most part. So the most detailed area at the moment, I would say, is the middle ground. Possibly the background trees as well. But I want the eye drawn to that sense of distance. And then the foreground is really there just to lead the eye in to those distant people and the distant landscape. But the reason I'm adding some indication of pebbles in the foreground is it doesn't really look at all like a pebble beach in the foreground. So in the same way that I've used just very simple mark making to suggest the distant people, I'm going to use pretty simple mark making to suggest foreground pebbles. So what I'm doing is picking out slightly enhanced versions of the colours I'm seeing around me as I sit on the beach, and I'm using the brush to just create little crescent shapes. I think I'm actually using a filbert here, about a 1-inch filbert, so it's got a rounded end, so it's quite a nice way to automatically create a little curved arc of paint. So I've used some white, some blue, some brown, some purple, and just experimenting with different shapes of mark and different sizes of mark, but trying to be fairly careful not to make any of them too precise, and also not to lose that sense of different levels and that stepped nature of the foreground as well. I don't want to undo what I did with the shadow work by being too haphazard. So it's a balance between, you don't want everything to look like a perfect array, but you don't want it to look just like a mess of marks either. So I actually ended up adding a few swathes of yellow in the foreground because I felt the colour scheme was a little bit too cool and didn't really reflect the sunny nature of the day. But there's the scene that I was inspired by. Obviously people have moved over the course of the hour or so that I was painting. It's probably more like an hour and 20 minutes or something like that. Hope you enjoyed this trip to the beach with me for the plein air adventure, and I hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show. Please remember to check out the finished painting. You can click on a link in the description of this video. That takes you to my website, and you can zoom in on the painting. You can look at the brushwork in detail just by clicking on that image on the website, And then if you want to buy a print or something like that, then obviously that's all available too. If you've got any questions, leave me a comment below. Either way, hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of the Sunday Art Show. Thank you very much for watching.